Health inspectors of Reddit, what's the worst violation you've ever seen? Former inspector here. I once discovered a rat infestation in the kitchen of a hospital. They asked me if I could prove my suspicions. I pointed out the numerous foodstuffs with 1-2 inches circular holes chewed in them, but they didn't seem convinced. I showed them the trail of droppings and footprints coming and going from a hole in the floor drain, but they didn't seem convinced. I showed them the 3 dead rats I had discovered under and around equipment. I think they began to believe me at that point. Used to have a job working as an inspector for storage tanks at places like dairies and factories. Went to a cheesecake factory once to test a milk storage tank. It had just been cleaned and was being prepped to be filled with a tanker full of milk. I noticed the floor of the tank was covered in bleach. It turned out, the floor manager couldn't be asked to spend the time sucking out the rest of the cleaning fluid used in the cleaning process and, as standard, just filled the tank with milk on top of a dozen gallons of bleach. His theory was that there was enough milk to dilute the bleach to acceptable consumption levels. I wrote a report and he was promptly fired. Worked in a restaurant. Sitting in the office one day I hear an awful squeaking shrieking noise. Took me a little while to find the source. Source turned out to be a mouse, stuck in some old spilled pancake syrup under a storage shelf, being eaten alive by the mouse stuck next to it. Did food safety inspection at a large slaughterhouse for a while. One day, I came round a corner, and one of the workers who was running service for the butchers had dropped a ham on the floor. So, the proper way to handle this for him was to leave it there, and call for a re-inspector to come pick it up. Take it out to carve off any contaminated bits and rinse it in boiling water. Now it relatively often happened meat was dropped on the floor. It's just very hard to avoid it when running in a factory setting with human labor. So this was common. What was uncommon was what the guy did. First he tried catching it as it fell, which would have been fine. No contact with any surface and he could have just thrown it back into the tub it had fallen out of. He didn't catch it though and it landed on the floor. Thinking that no one was watching, he tried picking it up and dropped it again. He did this 3 times. So first and foremost he's not supposed to be touching anything that's been on the floor. It cross-contaminates his hands and he has nowhere to put the contaminated product anyway. But he did this 3 times and dropped it 3 times. Freshly carved hams can be slippery when wearing vinyl gloves. He then, out of pure frustration and annoyance at the unwieldy ham, dropped down on all 4s and proceeded to pick up the raw, freshly cut, 6-kilo ham by his teeth. Stood up, ham dangling from his chompers, and dropped it into the tub with around 600 kilograms of product, and drove off with the tub for processing. He was fired a few minutes after that, and the entire tub of product discarded. He was fired a few minutes after that, and the entire tub of product discarded. There is a God. Not a health inspector, but a Chinese buffet near me was closed down because it got to 0/5 in its inspection. The staff just got up and left, locked the door, never went back. All the food was still out and everything. A week later a man was walking his dog past said Chinese buffet and heard a loud buzzing noise. Looked through the window to see hundreds of thousands of flies that had taken over the building as their new home. Was so bad that Pizza Hut next door had to close too. God dang. Get a flamethrower in there. My uncle is a health inspector in rural Australia. He got several complaints about a fish and chips shop in a small town in Victoria, with reports of it being a bit grotty and people getting chunks of hair in their hot chips. So he rocks up one day unannounced on a blazing hot day in the middle of summer, and the owner grates him and shows him around wearing a white singlet top with sweat patches under the arms, short shorts and no shoes. This guy's body was covered in hair, not just on his arms and chest, but his back and neck were like a werewolf. Clearly, this must be the source of the hair in the chips. My uncle decides to make a tactful comment about having wear appropriate clothes when working, so as to protect against hot oil burns. After seeing the property and giving a few basic suggestions, the only other thing he notices that needs immediate attention is the deep fryer itself. The oil is old and filthy, and likely full of this guy's hair, so he orders the bloke to drain it out right then and there. The owner does so, and at the bottom of the oil that is a dead, deep fried and crispy cat. Totally unfazed, the owner simply said, "Oh, that's where my cat went." Turns out a few months previously the shop was having a rodent problem, so the owner bought in a cat to catch them. He thought the cat escaped overnight and ran away. Nope. Looks like little Fluffy drowned in the deep frying oil, and Mr. Chippy has been frying him up over and over and over again ever since. The clumps of hair locals were complaining about weren't from the half-man half-wolf owner, but the fur and flesh of a dead cat. Pools that have absolutely no chlorine. Pedicure tubs filters that have never been changed. All of their disinfectants were expired. A restaurant that refused to clean up pest feces urine, refused to properly cool foods, and refused to properly reheat foods. The kitchen had exposed wood everywhere. Well, it would be exposed if there wasn't a thick layer of grease and no sanitizer. My dad was is now retired, of everything I ever heard. To jump out, he noted the trays at a Chinese restaurant weren't clean or warm. When he asked the employees, they acknowledged the heating element had failed, but that there was still chemical backup. Somehow, though, it wasn't hitting the dishes. Then he saw a cockroach crawl out of the washer, attempting to understand how the dishes were not getting rinsed. He found that it was backed up with cockroaches. They were cleaning the trays. They closed for remodeling for 3 days. But it was really cleaning up in order to pass inspection before they were allowed to open again. At a similar restaurant, he asked about a pail on the floor filled with a green substance. Soup of the day, they told him. Dad asked what it was, and was told it was scraps. The bucket was never emptied. It turned out, the scraps going in roughly equaled the soup going out, which meant that there was stuff in there that had been there for weeks at room temp, on the floor. Dad had them dump it as he looked on. A bonus story was when he caught a guy smoking in a kitchen and exposed the cigarette behind his back with a handshake. Not a health inspector, but someone in my city repainted their floor with non-slip paint and literally painted over a dead rat, sealing it in there. My favorite Chinese restaurant got shut down. My ex-wife worked for the city and I asked her what was the deal. She said the health inspectors found something leaking from the ceiling. They lifted the ceiling tile and shined a flashlight and saw multiple eyes staring back at them. It was chickens. They were raising chickens and the ceiling and chicken crap was dripping in the food that I had been eating at least once a week. My stepdad used to be a baker in an authentic recreation of an 18th century New French fortress. Because they sell bread to the public, the health inspector came by, and she was ripping into my stepdad for violations like the stonework walls, the dollar entranceways, or the lack of a mosquito zapper. He pointed out that they were following the highest standards except for things that would destroy the authenticity of this 18th century bakery. The health inspector relented and agreed to give him a pass after verifying the food storage area was secure. They went to the shed, which was a doorless building attached to the bakery. As the health inspector went in, there happened to be an escaped cow licking all of the loaves. My stepdad could only say, honestly, this never happens. They passed the health inspection. My friend was inspecting a restaurant, walked out the back to find a man stirring a huge pot of curry with his arm. No spoon or anything, just up to his hairy elbows in curry. I'd be more worried about how cold the curry is that he was able to stick his arm in. I had a health inspector tell me this story. There was a family in which both the elderly mother and a handicapped sibling used wheelchairs. Another sibling lived in the house with them and did all the driving, etc. The health department got a phone call from the local wheelchair company. The brother stopped by and picked up a new, custom-built wheelchair for his sister and for his mother, and returned within about 30 minutes, saying that the sister's wheelchair hadn't been made to the right specifications. It was too small. After he left, the staff noticed several roaches on the chair, so the guy I met got a call. Apparently, it was summer, Midwest, both hot and humid, and the house was all locked up, with no open windows for ventilation, curtains drawn, etc. The inspector entered the house and he said it was so stifling hot that he started to get dizzy, and, he thought, hallucinate. He said that there was a sound like leaves rustling in the fall, and the walls and floors were kind of vibrating. He then realized it was because they were literally covered in roaches. He immediately evacuated the 3 people living there, and the next day, they tented and sprayed the house. He went in a Tyvek suit and knee-high rubber boots, and said that the dead roaches were about 2.5 feet deep in most parts of the house. It's moments like these that make me think that people just straight up sometimes open portal to hack in their homes, or something. Not a health inspector, but my mom used to work at this restaurant where the owner just did not give a crap. It was a Mexican restaurant and my mom told me that once a lady came in asking for caldo de res, beef soup, but they didn't have any more meat, at least not the one used for that dish. They were about to let the lady know when the owner stepped up and told the lady that her food would be right out. The server and my mom were both confused as to what she was going to do. Well, this lady goes and literally digs through the freaking trash and pulls out some beef, some still with bone. She then ran it through water, cooked it and served it to that poor lady. My mom says the lady was even sucking the bone and she almost felt sick watching. My mom quit that job soon after. Not health inspector, but I worked as an assistant cook at a restaurant. 2 weeks into the job, I opened a cupboard to get a can of tomato sauce and I see a huge ass tarantula scuttling away behind the cans. I told the boss what I had seen, so that maybe we should get someone to deal with the huge ass spider living in the kitchen. Boss turns to me and say, I see you've met Eduardo. Just don't put your hand too close to him and you'll be good. Later another cook proceeded to explain to me the spider been living there for 2 years and they allowed it because he kept rodents and roaches away. I love that they named the tarantula Eduardo. Seems like a real bro. Not a health inspector, but witnessed some things at my first job as setup waitress at a banquet hall. The head cook had some hairy arms and he always mixed the salad with his hands, so you know that hair is getting him there, and one day we even found a used band-aid in there. Not a health inspector, but I used to manage a well-known sandwich shop. One day, I discovered a huge colony of black stachybotrys mold growing behind one of the walls. I mentioned it to my assistant manager, who told me that everyone knew it was there, and that the entire staff assumed that I also knew about it and was just keeping my mouth shut. I reported it to the district manager and the owner that day. They both told me that they knew for a fact that black mold was harmless and that they weren't going to pay $3,000 to tear out the drywall and replace it. I was fired inside of a week. I reported them to the local health department, but by the time the health department got around to doing the inspection, they had already fixed the wall. Taking 10 years as an inspector. Most dangerous is usually not the most disgusting. I've seen entire walk-in coolers they were using at 55-60 degrees Fahrenheit and the staff didn't even notice anything wrong. I've seen piles of mice that died getting stuck in the grease behind the fryer. I've seen staff throwing raw burgers within the grill then making a salad right after. I've seen squirrels and birds roaming freely inside a bread manufacturer. The stereotypes are true. Chinese restaurant kitchens are almost always filthy. The most common critical violation, dish machine not sanitizing properly. Mom worked for a hospital. Case after case of food poisoning came in, with one thing in common. A local restaurant had a lobster dinner special. Health inspectors went in and found that they were dumping the half-used clarified butter back in the pot in the serving area as they cleared the tables. Not a health inspector, but my mom told me this story some time ago. When she was in her early 20s, she had started working as a waitress for the restaurant in this big fancy hotel. Just a few days after she started working there, the hotel was hosting some big event, so there were a ton of super rich people staying there, and thus the restaurant was super busy. So my mom goes into the kitchen at one point and sees that one of the chefs is clearly sick. He's coughing and hacking, and continually wiping his runny nose on a handkerchief, right as he's making food. So my mom goes to her boss and is like, hey, this chef is sick. He can't be working right now. He's gonna make everyone sick. Her boss tells her that the guy said he was fine and to not worry about it. So my mom goes to the sick guy and tells him that he has to leave to prevent the food from being contaminated. He tells her that he tried to call in sick, but the boss told him that they were going to be too busy and they needed him, and if he didn't show up for work, he'd be fired. So my mom goes back to the boss and he admits that yeah, he knew the guy was really sick, but he didn't care if everyone else got sick as long as they got through the event. My mom tells her boss that this is wrong, and that he needs to send the guy home, take back everyone's food, refund their money, throw out all the food that may have been contaminated, close the place down and clean it up. He simply laughs at her and tells her she's fired. So she went and did the logical thing. She walked out into the dining room, stood on top of a table and shouted to everyone at the event that the boss forced a sick man to work today and all of their food was probably contaminated. There was practically a riot. Everyone crowded around and screamed at the boss, demanding their money back. In the end, the restaurant was temporarily closed. Everyone got their money back. The boss of the restaurant was fired by the owner of the hotel and mom got to keep her job. Your mom is the real MVP. Environmental health inspectors don't only cover restaurants. I inspect wells and septic systems. I see sewage every day. The worst thing I've seen are old men coming up to their door naked. And what makes it worse is that they knew what date and time I was stopping by. I had to take a sanitation class for culinary school. One day the health inspector came in and gave us a presentation. He looked up all the citations in town, and my personal favorite was improper use of a hand sink for the local strip club. Not a health inspector, but I was visiting a friend in Colorado and his roommate came home from a taco place in Denver. He unwrapped a napkin to show us a tooth that was in his taco. The guy still ate all of his tacos even after nearly swallowing a tooth. We tried to tell him he should have made a complaint but he was so nonchalant about it. Bleh. Not a health inspector, but worked in a restaurant where the managers were good friends with one. The coffee ice cream shop next door was shut down out of nowhere and we were all shocked because they were pretty busy. Health inspector came in one day and manager asked why it was shut down. Health inspector proceeded to tell my manager that he walked in unannounced early one morning before the shop opened, only to find the owner jerking off behind the counter by the ice cream. At least you know he was passionate about ice cream. My CNA instructor once witnessed a McDonald's employee, probably 16 or 17 years old, use a rag in the bathroom to clean the sink and anywhere else that needed wiping down. She later witnessed the employee use the same rag to wipe down the counters in front of the cash registers. They were fired on the spot. Not a health inspector but assistant manager at a restaurant for a year between university. I once saw my sous chef flick a fillet steak out of the pan, kick it back up with his foot and land it back in the pan to continue cooking. He did this 4 times. I was watching on the CCTV trying not to laugh every time he celebrated each catch. I'm not a health inspector, but I've been waiting tables since I turned 16. Some of the things I've witnessed have really turned me off to going out to eat. The worst thing I can think of right now is when I saw a manager blow his nose into the salad dressing and mix it up. I wish I was lying. Didn't realize salad dressing was so absorbent. I used to work next to a Chinese place that tenderized 20-pound roasts by repeatedly slamming it on the floor. The pizzeria I was working at the time was so dirty, the wife changed the baby inside your pizza box. At another pizzeria I worked at I was washing dishes and the manager came to me with a block of Swiss cheese. It was covered in mold and he wanted me to scrub it out of the holes. Like this video, but do it quietly so you don't wake up the sleeping papa. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video, or don't. Either way, have a great day you magnificent people.